They say you never really notice the cracks until your feet find them. It was just past 6 a.m. when I stepped outside with my first cup of coffee and nearly tripped over a bright orange violation slip tucked beneath the windshield wiper of my black, government-issued SUV, the one I used for active duty as a deputy U.S. Marshal. The paper flapped in the early wind, fluttering like a flag of passive-aggressive war. I didn't recognize the logo at first, a crude badge design, almost like a sheriff's star, but with the words Maplewood Ridge Community Enforcement Division stamped around the edges in blocky font. I frowned. We didn't have a community enforcement division. I looked around the cul-de-sac. No patrol cars, no security vehicles, no HOA maintenance trucks. Just the quiet hum of sprinklers clicking through morning routines, and a few porch lights still flickering in the soft orange dawn. The violation slip read, "Unauthorized vehicle parked outside garage code 14B aesthetic obstruction. Fine $250. Vehicle must be moved by 0900 or subject to additional enforcement action. Officer T. Blevins badge, number 317 MRCED. I laughed out loud. Aesthetic obstruction. My SUV was parked at the top of my own driveway, not blocking the sidewalk, not even touching the curb. And more importantly, it was a federal vehicle, not something I could just toss in the garage with my lawnmower and call it a day. I checked my Ring doorbell footage from the night before, around 2:44 a.m. A figure in a dark pseudo-uniform walked up my dry flashlight in hand and tucked the violation under my wiper. He wore a badge, carried what looked like a clipboard, and had a body camera affixed to his chest. But his gait was all wrong, too hesitant. Not like law enforcement. More like cosplay, with a purpose. I'd seen fakes before, plenty of them. You learn to spot them fast in my line of work: con artists, grifters, even self-styled vigilantes who tried to play cop with a surplus uniform and a pocket full of bravado. But never before in my own neighborhood. Never right in front of my house. I stared at the violation slip again. It didn't mention the HOA by name, just the mysterious MRCED, and a badge number that meant nothing to me. I could have ignored it. I could have chalked it up to a bored rent-a-cop on a power trip and tossed it into the recycling bin with the rest of the junk mail. But something about it didn't sit right. Maybe it was the audacity, the idea that someone thought they could fabricate authority and start enforcing aesthetic standards at 2:44 in the morning on a decorated U.S. Marshal. Maybe it was the fact that I'd just come off a 6-month assignment tracking an interstate fugitive network, and I wasn't in the mood to be pushed around by someone playing pretend. Or maybe it was the knowledge that in neighborhoods like ours, people like this often went unchecked. And I couldn't let that happen. Not here. Not now. At the next HOA meeting, which I rarely attended, I made a point to show up. I sat in the back of the room, wearing jeans and a plain gray shirt, no badge, no uniform, nothing to indicate who I was. There were about 20 people in attendance, mostly older homeowners who cared more about lawn height than local fraud. The HOA president, a man named Tony Blevins, was already speaking when I walked in. He wore a navy blue blazer and had the slicked-back confidence of someone who enjoyed his small slice of power a little too much. "And we've recently contracted with a community enforcement partner," he was saying, "to help us maintain standards and ensure visual harmony throughout Maplewood Ridge." "Visual harmony," I muttered. A few heads turned. Tony spotted me and faltered mid-sentence. His smile flickered, then returned. I raised my hand. "Yes, sir. Garrett. Marshal Garrett Hughes," I said, evenly standing. "I received a violation on my federally owned vehicle at 2:44 in the morning, delivered by someone calling himself Officer Blevins." A hush fell over the room. Tony cleared his throat. "We've empowered our enforcement staff to work flexible hours." "Your enforcement staff," I interrupted. "Is this individual post-certified? Does he have a valid security license with the state? Because issuing citations on private property in the middle of the night sounds a lot like impersonating law enforcement." Someone coughed. Someone else whispered. A woman in the front row gave me a subtle thumbs up. Tony shifted. "We'll be happy to look into that." "I already am," I said. That night, I dug deeper. I ran the badge number through every regional law enforcement registry. Nothing. No record of a licensed officer named T. Blevins. No listing of Maplewood Ridge Community Enforcement Division with the California Bureau of Security and Investigative Services. The company's name didn't exist in any state database. No incorporation records, no tax ID. It was a ghost entity, a front, which meant the person leaving violations at 2:44 a.m. was doing so under false authority and possibly committing multiple misdemeanor and felony level offenses, depending on the circumstances. I filed an internal inquiry with the U.S. Marshal Service to disclose potential interference with a federal agent. But more than that, I started to worry not about myself, but my neighbors. What if someone else had gotten a similar violation and paid it? What if people were being extorted, intimidated, threatened, all under the guise of HOA enforcement? And what if the person behind all of it was the same man running our HOA board? 2 days later, another violation appeared, this time taped to my garage door in the dead of night. Failure to correct previous infraction vehicle still visible from street. Second notice, fine doubled, no signature. Just a QR code that linked to a payment portal requesting $500. It didn't even try to look official anymore. Now it was a shakedown. That's when I knew I wasn't going to let this go. I wasn't just going to push back. I was going to tear the entire operation down, one forged badge at a time. A few days after the bogus violation slip, I was in the backyard rinsing my SUV when a hard knock rattled the front door. Not the kind of knock you get from a neighbor asking to borrow sugar or a kid selling fundraiser chocolates. This was the kind that expected submission. I dried my hands on an old towel and walked toward the front door, still in my joggers and a faded U.S. Marshals t-shirt. My instincts sharpened the second I saw the figure through the frosted glass. A man stood straight-backed on my porch wearing a crisp black uniform. His shirt bore a metallic-looking badge on the left breast, a name tag that read Blevins, and some patches that looked vaguely official though unfamiliar. He had a clipboard in one hand and a utility belt strapped across his waist, complete with what appeared to be handcuffs and a small radio. His posture screamed authority, but everything about his appearance was just off. Too clean, too curated, like someone dressing for a role they didn't quite understand. I kept the door chained and cracked it a few inches. "Can I help you?" "Good morning," he said, voice low and deliberate. "Officer Blevins, Maplewood Ridge Community Enforcement Division. I'm following up on an unresolved HOA violation regarding the vehicle parked in your driveway." I raised an eyebrow. "You mean my government-issued SUV?" "That's the one," he said, not missing a beat. "It's been cited twice now for obstructing visual harmony. It's clearly in violation of Section 14B. I'm here to verify if the correction has been made." "It's not obstructing anything," I replied. "It's parked in my own driveway, not on the street, not on anyone else's property. And that vehicle happens to be a federal marshal's unit." His eyes flicked past me to the SUV, noting the small decal on the rear window, U.S. government use only. Still, he didn't back down. "All vehicles visible from the public right-of-way are subject to HOA guidelines. Doesn't matter whose they are. I need you to sign this acknowledgement notice and agree to remove the vehicle or face a doubled fine." I opened the door wider, stepping forward so he could see me more clearly. "Let me ask you something, Officer Blevins. Are you post-certified? Do you have a valid state security license? Because from where I stand, you're impersonating a peace officer and issuing citations under authority that doesn't exist." He flinched, just a twitch of his jaw, the kind you only notice if you're trained to read body language. But he recovered quickly and extended the clipboard again, a smile barely holding its shape. "I'm enforcing community bylaws. This has nothing to do with police work." "Then why are you dressed like a cop? Why show up on my porch with a fake badge and a power complex?" He stepped back slightly, clutching the clipboard closer to his chest. "If you have concerns, I suggest you bring them to the HOA board. I'm just doing my job." I went inside, retrieved my own badge, a real one issued by the U.S. Marshal Service, and stepped back out holding it at chest level. His eyes locked on it, and for the first time, the smug calm drained from his face. "You're standing on the property of a federal law enforcement officer," I said, "and you just attempted to coerce me into signing an unenforceable citation while impersonating someone you're not. That's not just unethical, that's illegal." "I never claimed to be a police officer," he said, more cautious now. "No, you just dressed like one, acted like one, and showed up with a badge you can buy online." He took another step back, clipboard trembling slightly in his hand. "I'll be reporting this to the board. Please do. And while you're at it, tell them they just poked the wrong hornet's nest." Without another word, he turned and walked briskly down the driveway, climbed into a silver pickup with a faded sticker that read Community Services Division, and drove off slow enough to seem composed, fast enough to betray nerves. I watched him disappear around the corner, then stepped back inside and closed the door. Adrenaline hummed beneath my skin. That encounter confirmed it. Blevins wasn't just playing dress-up. He was the face of something bigger, a private operation masquerading as law enforcement, emboldened by a complacent HOA board, and probably running unchecked throughout the neighborhood. This wasn't just about me or my SUV anymore. It was about the abuse of power hiding in plain sight. And I had just been drafted into a war I didn't start but damn sure intended to finish. I didn't sleep much that night. I sat at the kitchen table long after the sun went down, my badge resting in front of me like a silent witness. I replayed the encounter over and over in my mind, Blevins' faux authority, the polished uniform, the clipboard with legal-sounding jargon, and the hollow threats that only made sense if you didn't know the law. But I did know the law, and now I needed to know everything about him. The next morning, I skipped my usual run and went straight to work, not to my federal office, but to my personal investigation board. I had a wall in my study covered with cork and push pins. Some people call it paranoia. I call it preparation. You don't spend 20 years tracking fugitives and not develop a healthy respect for patterns, especially ones that hide in plain sight. I started with the name Tony Blevins. It didn't take much digging. He wasn't a cop. Not current, not retired, not reserve. Not even licensed as a private security contractor in the state. What he was, however, was the owner of a tiny LLC called Sentinel Property Services, an enforcement solutions firm that marketed directly to homeowners associations. Their slogan, neighborhood safety, professional authority, zero compromise. It sounded like something ripped from a movie poster. I dug deeper. The company had been contracted by 3 different HOAs in the county over the last 5 years, 2 of which had been sued for overreach, including one case that involved detaining a teenage boy for skateboarding in a restricted common area. Sentinel had settled that case out of court. Suddenly, the faux badge and overcompensating demeanor made perfect sense. Blevins wasn't law enforcement. He was a franchise tyrant playing cop with a clipboard and a costume, and our HOA had hired him. That afternoon, I sent a quiet email to my liaison at the county sheriff's office. I kept it simple. No accusations yet. Just a request for information was Sentinel Property Services ever authorized to carry out civil enforcement in Maplewood Ridge. Any record of complaints. An hour later, my phone buzzed. Marshal Whitaker, the deputy on the other end, said, "I can't say much over the line, but you're not the first to ask. Sentinel's been on our radar for a while." I thanked him and hung up. That night, I drafted a formal complaint to the HOA board, but I didn't send it. Not yet. I wanted something stronger than my word against Blevins. I wanted evidence. The kind that couldn't be denied or dismissed in a closed-door meeting. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. 2 days later, I came home from work to find a small folded notice taped to my door. It wasn't in an envelope. No HOA letterhead. Just plain white paper with block text. Unresolved violation escalation notice. Final warning before fine. At the bottom, signed Officer Blevins. No title, no HOA board member signature, just him. It was a mistake. The moment I read it, I knew what I had to do. I went inside, pulled out one of the small body cameras I used for undercover assignments, and mounted it discreetly near my front door, angled just enough to catch anyone who approached. Then I planted a second camera near the driveway, aimed at my SUV. Let him come back. Let him try again. 3 days passed. Nothing. Then, on the 4th morning, a Saturday, I heard the familiar sound of gravel crunching. I peeked through the blinds and saw Blevins' silver truck parked half a block down, angled toward my driveway like a hunter stalking prey. He was back, clipboard in hand, radio on his belt, same black uniform. He approached like he owned the place. I waited until he reached the porch and raised his hand to knock, then I opened the door before he could touch it. "Morning," I said, cool and steady. He flinched. "We need to address the unresolved." "No, what we need to address," I cut in, "is the fact that you're not a licensed officer. And this neighborhood isn't your jurisdiction. I'm contracted through the HOA board. That doesn't make you law enforcement." His eyes narrowed. "Sir, I am here under the authority granted to me by the bylaws of this community." "Then show me. Show me the clause that says you can show up dressed like a cop, intimidate residents, and threaten fines." "I don't have to explain myself to." "Yes, you do," I snapped. "Especially when you're targeting a federal officer." That got him. His jaw twitched again. I'm going to have to document this as non-compliance, he said, backing away. I smiled and stepped onto the porch. Please do. And when you do, include the fact that this entire exchange is being recorded both by you and by me. I pointed up at the camera just above the door. Blevins looked up, saw it, and for the first time I saw fear behind the smug veneer. He turned and walked away. Not briskly, not angrily, just aware that the game had changed. Back inside, I reviewed the footage. Clear audio, full face, complete record of his arrival, threats, and retreat. I saved the files, made backup copies, and labeled them. Blevins Contact 2 confirmed impersonation. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. It was time to pull the thread and see how far this went. The sun hadn't even crested fully over the rooftops when Blevins came back. This time he brought company. I spotted the silver truck again, but it wasn't alone. A second vehicle, a dark blue SUV without any license plate on the front, rolled in behind him and parked parallel to my driveway. Two men stepped out. One was Blevins. The other wore a similar pseudo-uniform, black tactical pants boots polished to a near-military shine. A tight-fitted polo with an embroidered patch that read, Community Enforcement Division. It looked official until you looked closer and realized there was no badge number, no agency affiliation, no state seal. I didn't need more proof. I already had enough to open a case file. But what came next changed everything. I watched from inside as they walked up my front path, Blevins in the lead, the second man slightly behind, scanning the windows like he expected resistance. I flipped on the secondary camera feed. The one at the porch had picked up both their faces clean and clear. I hit record on the indoor voice recorder I'd stashed on the console table. Then I opened the door, calm, centered with my badge in my hand. Before I could say anything, Blevins raised his voice loud enough for my neighbors to hear. Sir, you are in continued violation of community standards. This is your final opportunity to comply before enforcement action is taken. Enforcement action, I echoed. You mean more fake citations taped to my door, more trespassing by unlicensed men playing dress-up? The second man stepped forward, hand hovering near a pair of plastic flex cuffs on his belt. This is your final warning, he said, voice clipped. Move the vehicle, or we will initiate a removal order. I stepped fully onto the porch, holding up my credentials. You're both impersonating law enforcement. You are not officers. You are not security licensed by the state. And you are now officially on record committing criminal trespass and impersonation on the property of a United States Marshal. Blevins' partner laughed, but there was no confidence behind it. Then Blevins did something I wasn't expecting. He reached for his radio, clicked it, and said, Unit 3, we have non-compliance at Maplewood 4729, requesting immediate support. He waited. Static. No answer. He repeated slower this time. Unit 3, this is Lead Officer Blevins. Do you copy? More static. I crossed my arms. Call all you want. There's no Unit 3. There's no lead officer. You made that up. You're alone out here. Blevins shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting between me and the street. It was the moment his fantasy fractured when he realized his illusion of authority wasn't just fragile, it was visible. I could almost hear the gears grinding in his head, trying to pivot, trying to salvage face. He cleared his throat. This doesn't have to escalate. It already has, I said. The moment you showed up in costume and tried to extort a federal officer on his own property, that's escalation. The next step, that's mine. I pulled out my phone, tapped the speed dial for our county sheriff's liaison. Yeah, it's Marshal Whitaker, I said when he answered. You'll want to send someone out to Maplewood Ridge. I have 2 men in unauthorized uniforms threatening removal of federal property. I have body cam footage, porch footage, audio, and they just tried calling for fake backup over a 2-way radio. The men turned. Blevins muttered, this is ridiculous. His partner took a step back, muttering something under his breath. Then, without another word, they left. No further threats. No warning notices. No follow-up. They walked back to the truck, an SUV, heads down, adrenaline clearly draining fast. But I didn't go back inside just yet. I stood on my porch, heart pounding, not from fear, but from clarity. This was never about a car. It was about power, control, fear. The HOA had gone from fines and flyers to deploying unlicensed actors in pseudo-uniforms to intimidate residents. And when their bluff was called, when real law entered the equation, they folded. But the most chilling part, they'd probably tried this with others. People who didn't know their rights. People who didn't wear a badge or have cameras or backup on call. People who had no choice but to comply. And that made me furious. I didn't just want to stop them from bothering me anymore. I wanted to dismantle the entire operation from the boardroom to the driveway patrols. This was no longer about defending myself. It was about exposing the lie. The monthly HOA meeting was always held at the Maplewood Ridge Community Center, a squat brick building with flickering lights, folding chairs that pinched your skin, and a podium that hadn't been cleaned since the Bush administration. But this month, something was different. The room was packed, and not with concerned residents holding coffee cups and passive-aggressive complaint lists. No, this was something orchestrated. Neat rows of people I didn't recognize. Some wore polo shirts with the Sentinel Property Services logo stitched over the chest. Others looked like plants, too quiet, too attentive, too in sync with each other. The HOA board sat at the front, smug and stiff-backed, like they were presiding over a courtroom, not a neighborhood potluck. I walked in wearing my off-duty jacket casual, but my badge clipped just inside, visible when I moved. I brought a printed folder, photos of Blevins and his sidekick, snapshots of their phony uniforms, close-ups of the fake badge, a copy of the state's licensing database, showing no match found, and my formal complaint, complete with a cover letter bearing the U.S. Marshal's seal. The moment I took my seat in the second row, a hush rippled through the room. Then the board president, Sandra Dyer, leaned into the microphone. Well, we'd like to thank everyone for showing up on time tonight. As always, we appreciate respectful dialogue. Respectful, that wasn't what they had in store. After 20 minutes of irrelevant updates, landscaping budgets, holiday parade dates, pool, keycard malfunctions, Sandra's tone shifted. We'd now like to address a matter of concern brought to our attention regarding interactions between HOA enforcement and certain residents. In particular, a few unfortunate misinterpretations. She looked directly at me. Would the gentleman in row 2 like to speak? I stood up calm as ever. Yes, I would. I walked toward the microphone, placed my folder down in front of her, and spoke into the mic so everyone could hear. My name is Marshal Daniel Whitaker. I'm a resident of this community. I'm also a United States Marshal. And what happened on my property last week wasn't a misinterpretation. It was a calculated act of impersonation and harassment. The silence was immediate. I continued. Mr. Blevins, representing your contracted group Sentinel Property Services, showed up on my porch wearing a uniform meant to resemble law enforcement. He threatened me with removal orders and fines. When challenged, he tried to summon backup that didn't exist. That's impersonation of a peace officer. That's trespassing. That's unlawful coercion. Sandra smiled tightly. With all due respect, Marshal Sentinel is a licensed third-party vendor operating— No, it's not, I cut in. I reached over, flipped open the folder, and turned it so she and the others could see. According to the state's licensing database, Sentinel Property Services has no legal authority to operate as a security provider. These men are unlicensed, unsworn, and unauthorized. Yet they're dressing like police and threatening residents. Murmurs began to grow in the crowd. The plants in the room shifted uncomfortably. A few actual neighbors I recognized leaned forward. I wasn't done. Furthermore, I said, pulling out a copy of the HOA charter, nothing in your bylaws, allows the board to deputize armed or uniformed individuals to conduct unsanctioned enforcement on private property. This is a liability nightmare. And if you think it ends with me, you're mistaken. I let the silence stretch for a few seconds before concluding. You didn't just violate my rights. You put this entire community at legal and financial risk, and I will not allow it to continue. I stepped back. Before Sandra could respond, someone else stood up. Mrs. McClure, an older woman from my cul-de-sac, who never spoke unless it was about rose bushes. I saw them too, she said, voice trembling. They came to my door last month. Said my birdbath was an unauthorized water feature. I thought they were real police. I was terrified. That cracked it open. Another voice chimed in. Then another. Stories spilled out residents who'd been threatened, intimidated, lied to. One man said he paid a $200 fine, in cash, to avoid getting reported. A young mother said her kids were afraid to ride bikes because they saw a man in black writing tickets on the sidewalk. By the time Sandra tried to regain control, the room had turned against her. She banged the gavel. Order, please. Let's all remember, this is a community meeting. You forgot that when you turned it into a dictatorship, someone shouted. A round of applause followed. I didn't say another word. I just gathered my folder, gave one last look at Sandra, and walked out. Not in anger, in certainty. Because now it was no longer just my fight. Now the whole neighborhood knew, and the tide had turned. After the HOA meeting erupted into chaos, something shifted in the neighborhood. The next morning, I stepped onto my porch with a cup of coffee and noticed something I hadn't seen in a long time. Neighbors talking. Not the usual wave and walk kind of interaction, but real conversation. Mrs. McClure was walking with Mr. Cheng from down the block, and they paused to wave at me. A few kids rode their scooters without glancing nervously at passing trucks. The atmosphere felt lighter, but I wasn't letting my guard down, because while the board was rattled and Blevins had retreated into silence, I knew this wasn't over. If anything, it was the eye of the storm. That night, I sat down at my desk and began what I knew would be a long road, a full-scale private investigation into Sentinel Property Services and the entire HOA board's involvement. I started by submitting formal requests for HOA expenditure records, contracts, vendor payments, security budget line items. Legally, under our community bylaws, those documents were available to residents upon request. Predictably, I got no reply, so I went deeper. I called in a favor from a former colleague at the county auditor's office. Within a week, I had copies of financial disclosures filed by the HOA over the past 2 years. Buried in the expense logs under neighborhood safety enhancements were a series of monthly payments, $400 to $500, to Sentinel Property Services, starting roughly 6 months before my first encounter with Blevins. The problem, the company wasn't registered with the state's security board, and their listed business address, a P.O. box in a strip mall 3 towns over. Worse still, I found a public grant for HOA community improvement that had also been routed, at least in part, to Sentinel. That meant taxpayer money might have been funneled to an unlicensed operation. Now, this was bigger than a few fake cops. This was fraud. Meanwhile, I wasn't the only one digging. A small group of residents, spurred on by what happened at the meeting, began meeting in private. We started calling ourselves the Ridge Watch. What started as 6 of us in my garage grew quickly to a dozen. Then 20. People brought stories, records, photos. Someone shared video of a Sentinel officer yelling at her teenage son for skateboarding on the sidewalk. Another resident revealed she'd been threatened with fines if she didn't paint her fence, even though her property was outside HOA jurisdiction. The most disturbing report came from Mr. Reyes, a retired firefighter who said he saw one of the Sentinel men peeking over his back fence at night, claiming to be checking for fire hazards. They were escalating, and not just with me. One evening, as I was organizing evidence, I heard a tap at my front door. Not a knock, just a soft tap. I opened it to find a folded note taped at eye level. No envelope, no signature. Just a warning. This is your final notice. Back off or face the consequences. You don't belong here. I stood there in silence, pulse steady. They thought fear would work, but fear is for the untrained. Fear is for people who think the law is something you can dress up in. I went back inside, slid the note into a plastic sleeve, and added it to the file. That week, I contacted my superior at the U.S. Marshal's office and requested official support for an off-duty investigation into civil impersonation and HOA corruption. I had enough preliminary evidence to justify internal review. It was approved within 48 hours. Now I had federal backing. The next step, cameras. I upgraded the ones at my house, added motion detection, and placed a hidden trail cam across the street, angled perfectly to catch every car entering and exiting Sentinel's frequent drive-bys. I even installed a decoy notice on my trash bin, hoping they'd try something stupid again. They did. One night, the cameras caught a man, not Blevins, but someone else in the same getup trying to open my side gate. When it didn't budge, he leaned over the fence, aimed a flashlight into my yard, and took several pictures before slinking away. The trail cam caught his license plate. I ran it. The vehicle belonged to one of Sentinel's regional compliance officers. The address on record matched the same strip mall P.O. box. But the plate was flagged in a different database, the one maintained by the county's Department of Consumer Protection. There had been 3 open complaints of harassment by someone driving that car, all from different HOAs. This was a pattern. I printed everything, created a digital log, time-stamped every interaction. Then I reached out to the local news. I didn't go public, not yet, but I gave them a heads up. If something happens in Maplewood Ridge, I said it won't be an isolated incident. This is part of something bigger. They listened. The following week, a reporter called me privately. They'd received several anonymous tips about militant HOA enforcement in surrounding neighborhoods. One source claimed Sentinel was training volunteers with fake credentials. Another alleged that the board president, Sandra Dyer, was receiving consulting fees from the same contractor she hired. It was getting darker, but also clearer. This wasn't about safety. It was about control money and intimidation. And I was going to expose every inch of it. From the fake cops to the complicit board, I knew they'd return. Bullies never quit on the first failed attempt, especially when their masks haven't fully cracked. And so I waited. Not idly. I waited strategically. After confirming Sentinel's compliance, officers had harassed other homeowners at night under the guise of checking after-hours violations. I set up 2 new cameras. One inside a birdhouse near my side gate. Another inside a solar garden lamp pointed straight at my tool shed. Each one was night vision enabled, motion triggered, and linked to a secure cloud backup. The plan was simple: bait them. I left my truck the same federal vehicle they'd cited in the driveway. Again, I made sure it looked freshly used, muddy tires, a few boxes in the back, labeled DOJ Logistics. I even clipped a blank form to the dashboard, just visible enough to look official. Then I left. I made sure to be seen leaving too in my personal car, wearing civilian clothes, heading toward town. But I didn't go far. I parked 2 blocks away and walked back through the nature trail behind my house. By 8:47 p.m., I was lying quietly in the loft over my garage, peering through a small slit in the siding eyes on the driveway. At 9:12 p.m., a familiar silver truck rolled up, no lights. It parked just before the HOA signpost and cut the engine. 2 men stepped out. One was Blevins. The other I didn't recognize, but he had the same getup, black tactical pants, radio on his belt, clipboard in hand. They didn't ring the bell. They went around the side, flashlights low, clearly trying not to be seen. What they didn't know was that my side gate now had a silent magnetic sensor rigged to my security system. The moment they touched it, ping, I got the notification on my burner phone. Then movement in the yard. They were inside. The cameras caught everything. One flashlight beam scanned my shed. The other pointed at my vehicle. The man with the clipboard took photos not just of the license plate, but of the contents inside the truck bed. Then he leaned down and tried the door handle. It was locked. He cursed under his breath, loud enough to trip the audio recording. Then came the part I was waiting for. Blevins reached into his vest and pulled out what looked like a yellow tag, the same type they'd slapped on my windshield before. But this one was pre-filled. I saw it later: failure to comply with HOA regulations, unauthorized federal equipment on residential lot. He stuck it under my wiper. Then the unknown man pulled out something smaller, a key, no, a universal gate hex wrench. He approached my backyard gate and tried to open it. That was it. I tapped a message on my phone. Go. Within 3 minutes, a black SUV pulled in quietly behind them. Official plates. One of my fellow deputies, Angela Shaw, stepped out. She didn't say a word, just flipped on her flashlight and called out, "Hands where I can see them." Blevins dropped the wrench immediately. His partner froze. Angela identified herself. U.S. Marshal. You are on private property. You are impersonating licensed officers. And you are attempting unlawful entry. I emerged from the shadows of the garage. Blevins' face went pale. Again, I said to him, "You didn't learn last time." He tried to stammer an excuse. We were responding to a report. There were no reports, Angela snapped. We've monitored the radios. This is a private home, not under community jurisdiction. You're violating federal and state law. Again, I turned to the other man. What's your name? He hesitated. Angela stepped forward. We already ran your plate, Mr. Connor Rivera. You didn't think we'd be watching. That shook him. We didn't cuff them. Not yet. But Angela issued an official cease and desist warning recorded on body cam, while I held up the printed footage of their approach from the garden lamp and the birdhouse cam. Full color, clear faces. They left without a word again. But this time, the story didn't end at my driveway. By morning, I'd forwarded the footage and full report to the sheriff's office, our DOJ liaison. And yes, the investigative reporter who'd contacted me a week earlier. The headline hit local news the next afternoon. HOA contractors accused of impersonating law enforcement targeting U.S. Marshal's property. The HOA board tried to distance themselves instantly. A public statement appeared on their website that read, "The Board of Maplewood Ridge HOA is investigating recent actions by a contracted vendor. We do not condone unlawful behavior." Too little, too late, because residents had seen enough. The Ridge Watch meeting that night drew nearly 50 people. Some were scared, some were angry. All were awake now. And that, more than anything else, was what the board feared. We weren't just documenting abuse. We were organizing. Next step exposed their full involvement. I knew we had them. But to bring this all home legally, publicly, and beyond denial, we needed a sting. Not just another confrontation in a driveway, not another YouTube-worthy clip. We needed a documented, undeniable, coordinated takedown that showed the truth under the harshest possible light. So we got to work. Angela and I brought in the sheriff's department and our regional DOJ rep to help structure the operation. We mapped out the previous incidents, time of day, pattern of intimidation, vehicle routes, even the type of violations they fabricated. Sentinel was operating on a rotating 2-week schedule, visiting homes they claimed were non-compliant during evenings between Thursday and Saturday. We planned to use one of the Ridge Watch members, Jeremy, a Navy vet, who lived 2 streets over and had also been harassed, as bait. Jeremy had a small trailer parked on his side yard, perfectly legal per county zoning. But Sentinel had tagged it once before. We agreed he'd leave it visible again, and we'd wire his property with audio and video surveillance. Angela and I would be off-site but close watching from an unmarked van equipped with live video feeds. Then came the final piece. We embedded a small microphone in Jeremy's porch light. It was sensitive enough to pick up even whisper-level dialogue. The trap was set. On a warm Friday evening, Jeremy followed the script. He barbecued outside, made sure he was visible, then went inside just before dusk, porch light on cameras rolling. At 8:54 p.m., they arrived. Blevins again. This time with 2 others, both in similar outfits. Their truck bore the familiar Sentinel magnet on the door, though it was slightly crooked, as if slapped on minutes before. They didn't knock. They went straight for the trailer. The microphones caught every word. "Same guy," one of them asked. Blevins grunted. "Yup, tagged him last month. Board said to hit him again. Make it stick." Then one of the others laughed. "Dude's got a vet plate. You sure we want to push this?" Blevins snapped. "He's just a grunt. HOA says it's unauthorized equipment, so we cite it." Then he reached into his vest and pulled out a fake citation. That's when we moved. Angela signaled to the sheriff's team. Within 20 seconds, 2 cruisers rolled up, lights off, then suddenly blasting red and blue across the lawn. The men froze. Angela and I emerged from the van and moved in. Hands visible. Step away from the vehicle. Blevins turned stunned. "Wait, what is this?" I pulled my badge from under my jacket and held it up. U.S. Marshal Whitaker. "You are being detained for impersonating law enforcement and attempting unlawful enforcement actions on private property." One of the other men tried to bolt. Bad idea. A deputy took him down before he reached the street. Blevins, meanwhile, stood dumbfounded as I cuffed him myself. "You've been warned, recorded, investigated, and now caught in the act. You're done." Angela retrieved the clipboard from the hood of the truck, dozens of violation slips already pre-filled with addresses of Ridge residents. Some even had sticky notes. Target prior complaint, refused compliance. It was damning. At the precinct, we got full confessions. Blevins admitted that Sentinel was never properly licensed. He revealed that Sandra Dyer, our beloved HOA board president, had personally hired him under the table. Payments were disguised as landscaping contracts to avoid public HOA disclosures. His fake uniform had been paid for using discretionary funds, authorized without a vote. The scope widened. Sandra and 2 other board members were subpoenaed. By the following week, our footage had made the evening news again. But this time, national networks picked it up. A U.S. Marshal targeted on his own property. A community being shaken down by pretend police. It went viral. HOA meetings across the state started getting scrutiny. Residents from other neighborhoods contacted Ridge Watch asking for advice. Our garage meetings were now broadcast via live stream. What began as a quiet protest had turned into a movement. The HOA board released a panic-stricken statement. "We deeply regret any actions taken by third-party contractors. We were unaware of the extent of their conduct and have terminated all contracts with Sentinel Property Services effective immediately." Too little, too late. The next community vote saw a record turnout. Sandra was voted out unanimously. And the best part, the state attorney general launched a formal inquiry into unauthorized enforcement actions by unlicensed contractors hired by HOA boards. Sentinel's founder, who'd never even lived in Maplewood Ridge, was arrested in a separate sting in another district. What they didn't realize all along was this. You can wear a uniform, you can flash a badge, but you can't fake the law. And when you try to use fear as power, eventually, the law comes knocking back. The courthouse smelled like polished wood and old justice. It had been 6 months since Blevins was cuffed in Jeremy's yard. 6 months of statements, evidence logs, press interviews, subpoenas, and one relentless unraveling of everything the Maplewood Ridge HOA had buried under decades of unchecked authority. And now it had all led to this moment, a full criminal trial. I took a seat on the witness bench in courtroom 4C, dressed not in uniform, but in a plain gray suit. I didn't want to look like a symbol of power. I wanted to look like a neighbor, a citizen, a homeowner who had simply refused to be bullied. The prosecutor and assistant DA, named Carla Mendez, opened with precision. This case is not just about fake uniforms or phony citations, she said to the jury. It's about a calculated abuse of power, about intimidation masquerading as order, and about the rights of citizens being trampled for the sake of control. She laid it out. Simply, the HOA had knowingly hired unlicensed individuals to patrol the neighborhood, issued threats and fines, and targeted specific homeowners, especially those who asked questions. Their goal was not safety. It was silence. The defense attorney, of course, painted Blevins as a man following directives, trying to ensure community standards amid poorly defined roles. They blamed Sandra Dyer and the board for miscommunication, for failing to disclose Sentinel's limitations. But our evidence spoke louder. The video footage rolled. The audio from the birdhouse camera played clear as glass. The jury heard Blevins say the board wanted it to stick. They heard him call Jeremy just a grunt. They saw his clipboard of pre-written citations and his fake badge glinting under the porch light. And then they saw the takedown. My testimony came on day 3. I described the first violation, parking my work vehicle in my own driveway, and how that had escalated into harassment, false threats, and impersonation. I detailed my discovery of Sentinel's fake registration, the forged HOA documents, and the intimidation tactics used against others. I told them about the warning note taped to my door. I held it up still in its plastic sleeve. This isn't just paper, I said to the jury. It's a message. It's a declaration that people like me, law-abiding, tax-paying homeowners, don't belong. That silence is safer than resistance. That asking questions is punishable. I paused, looked each juror in the eye. But silence is how people like this thrive. Then came the turning point. Carla called Sandra Dyer to the stand. Her legal team had insisted she testify in her own defense. A mistake. Under oath, she stammered through vague excuses. We thought they were licensed. I trusted the vendor. I didn't know he was using threats. But when Carla asked about the payments routed through landscaping contracts, Sandra's carefully held facade began to crack. You signed the check, Carla said. You approved the expense. You bypassed the board vote. And you attended meetings where these so-called security officers were discussed as enforcement tools. Sandra tried to deflect, blaming another board member, Ron Fields, but he'd already turned state's witness in exchange for immunity. Game over. By the end of the week, the verdicts were swift. Blevins guilty on 3 counts: criminal impersonation of law enforcement, unlawful surveillance, and attempted unlawful entry. Sandra Dyer, guilty of fraud, conspiracy to intimidate, and misuse of HOA funds. Sentinel's founder facing separate federal charges for impersonation, wire fraud, and racketeering. The judge didn't hold back during sentencing. Neighborhood associations are meant to protect, she said. But when they become tools of fear, it is the duty of the law and citizens like Mr. Whitaker to restore balance. Blevins was sentenced to 18 months in county jail with supervised probation. Sandra 3 years. But the real victory was never just about jail time. It was about vindication. For every neighbor who'd been afraid to speak up. For every elderly homeowner who'd been shamed into compliance. For the teenager yelled at for riding his skateboard. For Mr. Reyes, the retired firefighter who'd slept with his porch light on for months. For every voice that had gone ignored until we made them listen. I walked out of that courtroom lighter, not just because we'd won, but because I knew what came next. You never forget the sound of your name being called by a stranger in gratitude. It started one morning a month after the trial. I was standing in line at a coffee shop when a woman touched my arm and whispered, "You're the guy from Ridge, right? The Marshal." I nodded, cautious. She smiled, but her eyes watered. You gave us the courage to fight back." That moment rewired something in me. The courtroom verdict wasn't the end. It was the ignition. In the weeks that followed, homeowners from across the country reached out. I received emails, messages, even hand-signed letters from Florida, Oregon, Kansas. Some had their own Blevins, their own Sandra Dyer, their own HOA, pretending to be untouchable. But now, they had a blueprint. Now they had proof that one voice armed with law facts and unshakable calm could crack the entire foundation. We didn't just clean up our HOA. We turned it into a symbol. The new board was elected with a 91% vote turnout, a record. Gone were the career manipulators in polos with pocket bylaws. In their place stood veterans, teachers, retired judges, even a single mom who'd once been fined for sidewalk chalk. I declined the seat they offered me. Instead, I trained them. Quietly. Thoroughly. We formed something better than an HOA. We formed a firewall. One night, under stars that didn't feel like they were watching me anymore, I walked out to the edge of my property. I stood where Blevins once parked his truck badge, glinting in fake authority. I had something in my hand. A sign. Simple, wooden, etched by hand. I drove it into the earth myself. This land is not under control. It is under protection. Neighbors joined me. Silent. Some teared up. No speeches, no press, just presence. A few days later, someone left a package on my porch, inside a frame. The front page of a national newspaper. U.S. Marshal exposes fake HOA, police sparks nationwide reform. I hung it on the wall next to my old academy badge. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder of how close we came, of how far we fought, and of what we never ever let happen again.